In 2001, the most powerful furniture companies in America had something in common. They had warehouses the size of football fields. They had hundreds of employees. They had decades of brand recognition, millions in advertising budgets, and distribution networks that had taken generations to build. And every single one of them was about to lose customers to a 14-year-old boy sitting at a computer in his stepfather's house in Atlanta, Georgia. His name was Sean Belnick. He had $500. He had no warehouse, no staff, no industry connections, no business degree. He wasn't even old enough to drive. And within 3 years, his company would be generating more revenue than most adults earn in a lifetime. But here's the part nobody talks about. What Sean Belnick stumbled onto, almost entirely by accident, was a crack in the entire foundation of how retail worked in America. It's the summer of 2001. The internet is still in recovery from the dot-com crash that had wiped out billions of dollars and made e-commerce sound like a dirty word to most investors. The conventional wisdom on Wall Street, in boardrooms, and in business schools was unified and loud. Selling things online doesn't work. The internet is for content, for communication, not for commerce. Sean Belnick was 14 years old and had not received this memo. He had grown up watching his stepfather run a business, watching the friction and cost of physical retail up close. And somewhere in the space between what he was observing and what he thought should be possible, an idea began to form. What if you could sell furniture online and never touch the furniture at all? The concept was called dropshipping. It wasn't new. Catalog companies had used versions of it for years, but nobody had applied it aggressively to online retail at scale, and nobody had applied it to office furniture specifically. The model was simple in theory and almost dangerous in how effective it was in practice. A customer places an order on your website. You take their payment. You forward the order directly to the manufacturer. The manufacturer ships the product straight to the customer. You never see the item. You never store it. You never handle it. You collect the margin between what the customer paid you and what the manufacturer charged you. And you do it with almost zero overhead. For a 14-year-old with $500, this wasn't just a business opportunity. It was the only business model that could work. He had no capital for inventory, no space for a warehouse, no ability to hire staff. The dropshipping model didn't require any of those things. The constraints that should have stopped him became, in a strange twist of entrepreneurial logic, the exact constraints that forced him to build something better than the competition. He called it BizChair.com. He built the website himself. He reached out to manufacturers directly. Adult manufacturers, Fortune 500 suppliers, companies that had every reason to dismiss an email from a teenager. And he negotiated dropshipping agreements. And remarkably, many of them said yes. Because to a furniture manufacturer, the question wasn't who was asking. The question was whether they would get paid. Sean's model guaranteed they would. BizChair went live in 2001 with a product catalog, a payment system, and essentially no costs to speak of. And then something happened that nobody, including Sean, was fully prepared for. People bought the chairs. Not a trickle. Not just friends or family. Real customers, searching Google for office furniture, finding BizChair, and placing orders. By 2004, 3 years after a teenager launched a website in his stepfather's house with $500, BizChair.com was a real, functioning, scaling American business. And then came the number that made people stop and read the headline twice. By 2005, BizChair.com reported $13.6 million in annual sales. Let that sit for a moment. $13.6 million, 4 years after launch. The founder was still a teenager. But here's where the story gets genuinely interesting. Because most retellings of Sean Belnick's story stop at this point. They treat the revenue number as the punchline, the proof of concept, the inspirational ending. What they miss is the more important question. The question that actually matters. Why didn't this happen earlier? And why didn't everyone do it? Because the dropshipping model wasn't secret. It wasn't patented. It wasn't protected by any barrier Sean had access to that his competitors didn't. The manufacturers he worked with were the same manufacturers the big furniture retailers used. The internet infrastructure he relied on was available to every retailer in America. Google was just as visible to established companies as it was to a 14-year-old in Atlanta. The answer isn't technological. It isn't financial. It's psychological. The established furniture industry looked at the internet and saw risk. They saw threat. They saw something that might cannibalize their existing model, confuse their sales teams, and upset their retail partners. They had too much to protect to move quickly. Too many stakeholders who needed to agree before anything changed. Too many layers of institutional caution sitting between the idea and the execution. Sean Belnick had none of that. He had nothing to protect. No existing model to cannibalize. No stakeholders to consult. No committee to approve his decision. He had $500 and a simple question. Does this work? And that is the real lesson hidden inside this story. Not that a teenager built a successful business, but that the single biggest advantage in any market isn't capital, isn't experience, isn't connections. It's the absence of the thing that stops everyone else from moving. Sean Belnick succeeded not because of what he had. He succeeded because of what he didn't have. He didn't have fear of failure because he had nothing to lose. He didn't have institutional caution because he had no institution. He didn't have advisors telling him it was too risky because nobody took him seriously enough to give him advice. Every friction that slows a mature business down simply didn't exist for a 14-year-old with a laptop and a $500 idea. BizChair.com kept growing. The company eventually crossed $40 million in revenue. Sean Belnick became one of the youngest self-made millionaires in American business history. He later went on to build and sell multiple other companies, compounding a track record that began in a bedroom before he was old enough to have a driver's license. But here's the question worth sitting with long after this video ends. The gap Sean Belnick exploited in 2001 is closed now. The furniture industry is online. The manufacturers have their own e-commerce operations. The dropshipping playbook has been written, published, turned into courses, and sold to millions of aspiring entrepreneurs around the world. But the underlying gap, the one that actually made him successful, that one is still wide open. Because the gap was never about furniture. It was never about dropshipping. The gap was the distance between what incumbents are afraid to do and what someone with nothing to lose is willing to try. That gap exists in every industry. And somewhere right now, there is a person who doesn't have any of those problems. A person who sees the gap, not because they're smarter, but because they're looking from a different angle. A person who has nothing to lose and a simple question. Does this work? Sean Belnick asked that question with $500 and a website about chairs. The answer changed his life. The more interesting question is, what gap are you looking at right now? And what's stopping you from asking the same question?